In One Piece chapter 1115, Oda gave us one of the biggest lore dumps ever. What we find out about Joyboy and the Void Sentry is on the same level as learning what's beyond the sea in Attack on Titan. The cover page of Continental Fragments features a happy Yamato watching Hiyori prepare a tasty looking bento with Toko. So I guess this cover series will go on for more than Yamato's 6 stops, since this is preparation for the pilgrimage. In the flower capital of Wano, the Straw Hat Jolly Roger still remained just beneath the Shogun's estate. Despite the isolation of their country, even they were listening to Dr. Vegapunk's broadcast. This was thanks to a transponder snail they found amongst Orochi's belongings. After telling the world that the legendary Joy Boy was the first pirate, Vegapunk began to clarify how that came to be. Momonosuke and Tama were enjoying some dango, with Kinemon, Shinobu, and some other samurai in tow. Momo was fascinated to learn that Joy Boy was a pirate like Luffy. Kinemon was just as interested in the fact that their sovereign knew of the ancient figure. We would then transition to a certain jail cell at the G4 Marine base. This isn't G5 however, so the wait for more smoker content continues. Instead, everyone's favorite impersonator, Three-Tongued Tomorrow Black, is back. He's given up on pretending to be Luffy and is now impersonating Eustace Kid, now that he's out of commission, which is hilarious. His right-hand man, the false killer, was unfazed by the mention of Joy Boy. He was pretty sure that their leader could easily take the old pirate down, which Tomorrow agreed with since the guy was already dead. The fake Heat was impressed by their captain's confidence, which was only dwarfed by the size of his stomach. The serial impersonator happily claimed that he was a million times stronger than this so-called Joy Toy. The marine grunts surrounding Egghead Island all had their jaws on the ground. Dr. Vegapunk clarified to the audience that his deductions were only based on a handful of poneglyphs he had access to. However, the narrative they spun together depicted the history of a great war that took place many centuries ago. He added that during this time, Joy Boy had a certain enemy, an organization that is now known as the World Government. This stunned the Marines even more, as they realized the side that they were on, which made sense to some of them as, after all, Joy Boy was a pirate. At this point of the broadcast, War Curry was absolutely fuming with rage as he charged after Luffy and the Giants while calling out Vegapunk's name. The Doctor claimed that in the past, the world government was known as the Allied Powers, a temporary union of 20 individual kingdoms. Elsewhere, Top Man wasn't the only enraged elder. Saint Mars strode through the enclosure while rendering every transponder snail in the vicinity unconscious with his Conqueror's Haki. But Vegapunk was far from done. He deduced that such an alliance was the only means to which they would be able to thwart the powerful faction that Joy Boy belonged to. And the accompanying imagery is that of a silhouetted figure akin to Gear 5 Luffy, leaping towards several royals. Unfortunately, Dr. Vegapunk wasn't aware of what sparked such a conflict in the first place. Because of that, he wasn't willing to judge the morality of either side. He just knew that it was a clash of two opposing ideologies. Stella then retraced his steps towards the origin point of Joy Boy's story, a civilization beyond their wildest imagination. Tsunisha, who once knew Joy Boy, remained in silent contemplation. Vegapunk described the place as being so highly advanced that it's hard to believe it existed more than 900 years ago. The Minks of Zou were gathered and heard that the weapons that existed during this 100-year war were well beyond modern science. And for Vegapunk, modern science is already hundreds of years ahead of the pack. Carrot, the new leader of the Minks, was amazed by the revelation, while the various musketeers remained silent. Foxy cackled from his raft. He doesn't have the Jolly Roger Luffy made for him, and only his old ship's figurehead appears to have been salvaged. He called Dr. Vegapunk a fool for his words. With his time-skip facial hair, he even called the Doctor a peanut head, which made the starving Porsche hungry. Foxy then corrected himself and just said the guy was big-headed, which made Hamburg laugh. Dr. Vegapunk admitted that the ancient technology was mind-boggling even to a genius like himself, and that was ultimately the root of the issue. Over in the Labostratum, a Denden Mushi call was received. An exhausted Edison reached out to Stussy. Kaku listened in on their conversation. Edison instructed Stussy to lower the barrier and escape. But the former agent wasn't willing to, since the Straw Hats were still in danger. However, Edison argued that there was no point in having the barrier up anymore, since the monstrous Gorosei could just ignore it. Saint Saturn callously dealt with several snails, just like Mars. Edison believed that they had already done everything in their power to aid the Straw Hats, and he was certain that they would make it out alive. Over their communicators, Nami wondered how much longer it would take for Jinbei to meet up with them. The Fishman apologized, but promised that it wouldn't be much longer. But Zoro didn't see the need for apologies since they were busy, which only pissed Nami off more. Again, she told them to hurry up. They could tell that the Marines were moving their ships to block the northeastern coast. If this resulted in their demise, she promised that she would never forgive him. Speaking of which, Stussy was relieved to hear Edison's words, as she feared that failure would be unforgivable in Stella's eyes. Edison pointed to how ridiculous that was, but wanted her to focus on getting out of harm's way. However, Stussy wasn't really sure what to do with herself. Without Stella, she wondered who she was meant to live for. She didn't believe she had a purpose anymore, which is something we've talked about for a while now. Where does Stussy fit into the story beyond this point? If we disregard the whole 10 crewmates thing that a ton of fans subscribe to, I'd imagine joining the Straw Hats would be a solid option. She is the clone of a famous pirate after all. If she decides to live for Luffy, she could end up becoming a rival to Boa Hancock like her progenitor was to Gloriosa on Rox's crew. Kaku listened to the words of his former comrade and had a somber look on his face. I'm sure he can relate to a sense of duty and desperate need for a servitude-based purpose. Elsewhere, Nujuro managed to toss everyone away. Bonnie rushed in for a giant-sized kick. They couldn't afford to let the old man use his sword since he could cut anything with it. The Elder did not have time to waste. He needed to focus on all the living voices on the island in order to stop the broadcast. He hit Kashi with one of his hind hooves and drew his black blade. Preparing to strike, he called out Bonnie's name. Just before she could lose it, Frankie lowered her head and told her to get down. In the process, Bonnie shrunk down to her natural size. Instead, the figurehead and Jolly Roger of one of the giant ships were severed. Frankie was surprised by Bonnie's sudden change. She admitted that she can't keep Distorted Future going on for too long. She seemed tired. Dr. Vegapunk then dropped yet another bombshell, that the Void Century ended with Joy Boy's defeat. The vestiges of both the ancient Iron Golem and Zunisha were then shown, remnants of that long-lost history, both of which are now figures of grief and lament. Nujuro then galloped into the air while questioning how much Vegapunk intended to reveal. He was frustrated to notice just how many life forms were above. Vegapunk professed that the aftermath of the conflict had terrible consequences. The Elder cut the massive cloud in half with a single slash. Apparently, the ancient conflict scarred their world forever, and those scars have never healed. The various Cypherpole agents could not believe their eyes. The Seraphim also took notice of their newfound liberation, as snakes being the most animated reaction of them all. Maybe coming into contact with Luffy had an even more profound impact than we thought. The freed people began to scream as they fell from the great height. While they did, Vegapunk continued to say that everyone knows that travel between islands can be an especially difficult task, that the seas a person needs to travel are very dangerous. Because of this, most people stick to the places where they were born, and never get the chance to experience the cultures of others. This much was pretty obvious to most people. Vegapunk agreed that this was common knowledge in the present day. But as it turns out, this was not the case a millennia ago. Oshiro listened while his students trained. A world-ending ecological disaster took place during the Void Century. Vegapunk claimed that the ancient world had been consumed by the ocean, that in the present, they were living on the remains of what once was, continental fragments of the landmasses that previously existed. The Revolutionary Army's members were mind-blown. Only Dragon and Sabo remained stoic. Vegapunk told the world that the world of the past was currently at the bottom of the ocean. He knew that all of this would be hard to believe based on just his words alone. But nevertheless, he insisted that there truly were many vast continents in the past. The people of Kokoyashi village could not believe it. Gezo wondered where Nami's sister Nichiko was going while the world was at stake. In response, the blue-haired beauty just told him to tell her about it later since she was going to check on the tangerines. Vegapunk professed that these changes to the world helped to explain how 100 years of history could be kept from the public. Something unbelievable happened and was corroborated by all the data points. Within just a century, The average sea level had risen by an unreal 200 meters. The idea alone was enough to make tons of Marines nearly pass out. They rationalized that a warship is only 60 meters tall. With that in mind, they could totally understand how the old world was wiped out. But now wasn't the time to be listening in. The Seraphim and Cypherpole agents had been spotted and needed to be rescued. Over in Mocktown, the folks there were still making fun of Dr. Vegapunk and believed him to be a liar of the highest order. But in this crowd, is that Hawkins? I guess that 1% survival chance still worked out in his favor. Talk about good luck. In the Sakura Kingdom, King Dalton wondered if such a reality was even possible. Behind him, Doctorine was laughing. Even at her old age, the world was still finding new ways to keep things interesting. Which is exactly how I feel about this series right now. Miss Golden Week showed up for the first time in a while, and now sports an apple hat as if there's a Vegapunk gift shop nearby. And a nearby mountain was believed to be about 200 meters tall. The thought of such a thing being totally submerged was mind-boggling. The resulting death toll was incomprehensible. Dr. Vegapunk then decided to touch upon how such a flood could have possibly occurred in the first place. The natural assumption being that such a thing was due to some major natural disaster. However, Dr. Vegapunk could unquestionably confirm that this was not the case. That this was in fact due to a man-made catastrophe. Morgan shouted with disbelief. Vivi put a hand over his beak as the doctor continued. He claimed that if this disaster were the result of natural phenomena, there would have been records showing early warning signs many centuries before it. As again, this was a world-altering event. But all of Stella's research into meteorology, geology, ecology, and atmospheric science showed absolutely no signs of natural accumulation. Such a thing happening so spontaneously within the span of a century was utterly impossible. This meant that the cause was elsewhere, and Vegapunk's theories were confirmed just a few days ago when he analyzed the current sea levels of their world, something that was caused by the destruction of Lulusia with the power of the Mother Flame. So Imu kind of outed theirself here. The elders remained grim as Vegapunk told the world that this ancient disaster was caused by ancient weapons capable of sinking the world. We would then arrive at the fittingly named Pangaea Castle of the Holy Land. Pangaea, or Pangaea, of course being the name of the supercontinent that came before the continental drift that resulted in our world. Vegapunk expressed that this very same firepower still exists, and is just waiting to be used again. The shocking truth was that the Great War, which so thoroughly devastated the planet during the Void Century, isn't over. We are then left with the piercing red eyes of Lord Imu. What an absolutely insane development. The world is still at war, and nobody even knew that they were a part of it. The sheer fact that this broadcast is not over, and that Vegapunk likely has more to say, is just as crazy. I really need to hear everyone's reactions to this last bit of information. It's also really funny that despite being at the center of all these issues, the Straw Hats are going to leave this place as the world's least informed people. And this is just the beginning, my friends. There are a lot of gaps to be filled in with this information. It is such an exciting time to be a One Piece fan. Leave us all your thoughts on the madness in the comments. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.